For most people, everyday life was based around work on the farm. This was really hard, back-breaking work, as there was no mechanisation or machinery in farming in Ireland until the 1960s, and even in some places right up until the 1970s. Everybody had to get involved, from the youngest to the oldest, and entire communities could be brought in for the bringing in of the harvest. Everything from the collection of the turf in the early spring, right up until the bringing in of the grain harvests in late autumn.
Turf was cut from mid-March to mid-May, depending on the weather and the level of rainfall. The first task was always to remove the top sod from the bank. Two types of slaying were used to cut turf. There was a wing slaying and a flat slaying. When the turf was cut, the wet sods were thrown up on the bank and spread out with a pitchfork and a wheelbarrow in order to dry. After a few weeks, when the turf developed a skin, it was subject to a process called footing. It was put standing up, leaning against each other in order for the wind to catch it. Then there was another process of ray footing where it was built in to larger clamps. Today people bring home the turf by car and trailer or tractor and trailer, and they put it into a turf shed in order to dry. In those times, people used to use the donkey and cleaves or the donkey and cart to bring home the turf. And the turf was neatly stacked against the gable end of the house, and this provided a certain warmth for the house before ever there was a sod burnt. Turf cutting today is becoming a tradition of the past, and this is due to the fact that many raised bogs are protected. And this has happened in order to counter climate change and for biodiversity reasons. And it's also very important in the preservation of some bird species that have lost their natural habitats, particularly the curlew.
So in the springtime, along with the cutting of the turf, farmers also would prepare the land for the harvest. This involved the ploughing and harrowing of the ground. This was generally done with larger plough horses like Shires or Belgian drafts, but could in some extreme cases be done by a donkey. Once the ground was broken and prepared, they would then spread the seed of the harvest. This was left over the summer months to ripen and eventually become the crop that would be harvested. So by Easter time, all of the cereals would be planted, and they would stay in the ground over the summer, eventually growing and ripening into the golden harvests. Depending on which part of the country you lived in, you would have different types of cereals grown. So for example, in the East Coast, you would have had wheat and barley more commonly. But here on the West Coast of Ireland, they needed to grow the hardier oats. One of the most important tools during the time of the harvest was the scythe. It was said that a good man with a scythe could cut 3 to 5 acres of ground in a day, with some exceptional men cutting up to 7. Now to give you an idea what that looks like, Croke Park Stadium, the biggest stadium in the country, the pitch is 3.7 acres of ground. So in modern times, all of the cereals are cut by large combine harvesters. But not only do the combines cut, but they also thresh and separate the chaff from the wheat, doing in a matter of hours what would have taken entire communities days or even weeks to complete. This mechanisation of farming means we no longer need large groups of people or metals coming together to bring in the crops.
Haymaking was always carried out at the peak of the growing season in June and July. Traditionally, hay was cut with the reaping hook, the scythe, or the horse-drawn finger mower. In more recent and modern times, hay was cut with the tractor-drawn free mower or with the more modern rotomowers that one finds today. When the hay was cut, it was turned, it was tossed, and it was shook out in order for it to dry and season. When it was fully saved and seasoned, it was then made into haycocks. Those haycocks then were taken and made into big storecocks or reeks close to the farmyard. In more modern times then, hay sheds were built to accommodate the storage of loose hay or hay bales. Hay meadows of the past are very different from the hay meadows of today with their industrial green grass. There was no spraying of any weed killers or chemicals at that time. So meadows were a riot of colour with lots of natural wild flowers, such as vetches, and there was all the different clovers, red clover, yellow clover, white clover, buttercups. This led to a greater biodiversity of bees and pollinators in their natural habitats. The meadows were also home to a bird called the corncrake that serenaded the Irish countryside for months on end during summertime in decades past. Traditional haymaking is now unfortunately a thing of the past. Winter fodder is now almost entirely silage, and this is green grass taken to a silage pit and stored under polythene, or else green grass rolled up in round black bales. Sometimes these bales are painted with white paint in order to protect them from bird damage. It's my view that they're not nearly as nice as the haycocks that once dotted the meadows of Ireland in times past.